And going back to the Yoga Kurunta again, I mean, it means other people have more recently, I think, like Jason, have said that a number of people actually have mentioned the connection to Kurunta as rope or something like that, right? Have you heard of that idea that there is a book out there called the Yoga Kurunta, but it's a rope postures?
The Lonavala Yoga Institute published what was the Yoga Kurunta. They had published it under a different name because they didn't know it was a hatha abhyasa paddhati. And after Jason's research, I think that's come up, and they assume, I think Jason assumes that it's a Maharashtrian manuscript.
And the hatha abhyasa paravarti, this is a similar text to the Tatvanidhi, right? It's based on this text.
It has 120 some asanas in it, and it's got a big section on sex in there too, connected with Vajroli Mudra.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And where is that text, and where did it come from?
Well, that text is one that the Lonavala Institute had in their manuscript collection, and the text that is in the Mysore Palace is actually indicated with numbers that show the correspondence to the Sritattvanidhi. So it was a source book for the Sritattvanidhi asanas. And there is another book on asanas also. The Jodhpur Institute has a text, a number of texts with a number of asanas also. And I don't know whether you know that story of the Nath Yogins in Jodhpur.
No. Love to hear.
Well, there was a king called Man Singh, and he invited the Nath Yogins into Jodhpur, and they came there, and of course they began to cause problems, playing so-called magic tricks on people and sexual things apparently. And eventually the citizens of Jodhpur told him either he had to go or the yogis had to go. And he abdicated from the throne and went with the yogis. But it's left a whole collection of texts on yoga in the Jodhpur Palace.
You didn't get inspired after writing that book to go further into this and
Actually, I applied for a Canada Council grant to travel around because I wanted to go around to small places where there were yoga centers and things like that and check for other texts. We had a jeep and 9 languages between us, and they didn't give a grant.
Right. Maybe protectionist within, this dissemination of more recent roots of yoga. Perhaps there's a reticence to own that by.
Yeah, at that time it was I don't know about grants. I've always had a problem with trying to get grants to do things. When I've written big save the world type applications that are totally useless, they give the money. If you know what you're doing, they don't want to give it.
How, the Yoga Makarunda that actually Darby showed me, is that, how is that similar to the Tatvanidhi? Or can you see some direct correlation through? I mean, how close, for those people that want to know how close Krishnamacharya's yoga that he taught as Ashtanga yoga is to these texts? Is it one of the same thing, or do we see some influences from these earlier texts, but him kind of making his own interpretations as well?
Well, they must have had. I would assume that they had connection. I believe that Krishnamacharya lists the Sritattvanidhi in his bibliography, but he doesn't list the Yoga Kurunta in his text that he did. And I can't remember. It's so long since I've looked at Patabi Joyce's work. It's so long since I've looked at my own work that it's hard for me to compare it or to say anything about it that's off the wall.
Yeah. You sent me your Yoga Sutras, which is a really interesting read. How what is specific about your take on the Yoga Sutras? Because it was unusual.
Well, I think that basically what I sort of came to was what yoga is about is the exploration of consciousness. And the exploration of consciousness is done by working with three things: knowledge, action, and desire. And the whole structure of the Yoga Sutras is based on that. The first pada is knowledge, the second one is Kriya Yoga, or actions, and the third is the desire, or the vibhutis, and the vibhutis and the samadhis, the ultimate samadhis. So I hadn't come to that conclusion. I mean, I came to that conclusion as I worked with the Yoga Sutras. And then when you see it in that fashion, that as an exploration of consciousness, you realize that what they've been talking about in the Upanishads and the earlier texts and the texts from 1,000 years later is the same thing. They've worked with the same, with that problem. So they have a continuity of scholarship from 1,500, 2,000 years before the Yoga Sutras, and for the next 1,500 or 2,000 years afterwards, where there is that exploration. And now this becomes more relevant because we have Western philosophers like Donald Hoffman and others who are speaking about these kinds of things, whereas previously people who explored those kinds of things were burned as witches, and such things are put off to the side as being crazies. So no, I wouldn't have come to those conclusions except through looking closely at the Yoga Sutras.
And this is a work that you are going to be publishing soon. Is that right?
Well, maybe it's. I've never had. One of the reasons why I haven't published is because even when I do publish, I lose control over it, and I don't get paid.
Right. Problems. Are you still practicing yoga? What does yoga mean for you these days? Are you chanting Shastra or practicing asana?
Well, I'm reading the Mahabharata and the Spandakarikas over and over again with different commentaries. So I still continue on, and I can't do asanas any longer because I cracked my tibia. I was walking in the forest one day and I slipped on the ice. I slid down a mountainside and hit a tree, and my leg bent backward and cracked the tibia.
Oh God.
So I'm waiting for some possibility of replacement on that. So that's kind of hindered my movement. And in fact, I haven't gone anywhere for the last 3 years because of that as well.
I was going to say, are you going back to India at all these days? When was the last time you were there?
It was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I took a young yoga student. He needed an operation on his arm, and we went to India and did it.
Are you teaching at the University of Calgary now?
I teach advanced asanas in my house.
So you've always been teaching yoga as well as postural yoga?
Almost 46 years I've been throwing bodies.
I didn't know that. Right. And I mean, just slightly tangential now, going back to the book again. How do you see that the whole thing has evolved from your book? Are you pleased with the direction it's going? I mean, because so much has come out of that subsequently. Do you want to comment on, it's your chance to comment on how you see modern yoga scholarship progressing now and the direction it's going now? What do you think about that?
Well, I think the most serious work has been done by scholars today like James Mallinson and Jason Birch and Mark, and also the book by a very interesting book by Elliot Goldberg, Pathways of Modern Yoga.
That was good.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, there's a series of scholars which haven't been necessarily connected with yoga. Sanderson, Mark Dixkowski, and Philip Maas. These people have done very interesting work. It hasn't really been taken up by the yoga people, but there's work that has superseded some of the most interesting work on philosophy and Sanskrit that has come out.
How do you think the direction of yoga has now changed subsequent to your book and with the work of, Jim and Jason Birch?
Well, the capitalist machine seems to be the main influence on yoga today. Like that's what's driving it in some kind of a way. But people are doing better asanas. They're examining their asanas more closely amongst all the other paraphernalia, like their yoga mats and things.
Did seeing these asanas that you managed to photograph, did that change your perspective on physical yoga practice and the way that you practiced and taught?
Well, I worked in a kind of a different way. Since I worked with individual teachers, it was always hands-on. And working hands-on, like I consider manipulations to be openings that you open into part of them that belongs to them. It's their natural self. So that you can go along with somebody, and just by touching them or moving them in some kind of a way, you can take them through postural preferences and into what is their own self in an instant. Whereas they might never get that if they're working through their own limitations, kind of thing. So basically, that's the way that I like to work.
I suppose I didn't ask you originally. What do you think the purpose of these? The Hatha Yoga. The book, which is the book that's inspired the Tattvanidhi, the Abhyasa Parivriti or something like that. I mean, do you see these books as teaching modern yoga for the purpose of physical exploration, or I mean, you mentioned before that the asana was an interpolation, a kind of anomaly?
Well, if you look at the definitions in Patanjali, Sthira Sukhamasanam, Pratna Shaitalyanda Samapatibhyam, I mean, you can take those definitions and they include everything in those definitions. Prayatna, effort, Prayatna Shaitilya, slackening of the effort, finding balance, Ananta Samapatibhyam, and an element of transcendence, Ananta Samapatibhyam, in the asana, where it becomes complete. So even in Patanjali, by that simple definition of 4 words, he's covered the whole possibility of asanas. And actually in Patanjali, I mean, one can say that asanas don't belong, but that second pada is Kriya Yoga, the yoga of action. And action includes everything. This is a means to work through your postural preferences, is to come to a realization of your own self. So it's also an examination, a reflection on consciousness through your first world, which is your body. In fact, in my second book, I've divided asanas, rather than putting them into groups, I've divided them simply into moving asanas and still static asanas.
Yeah, because in the original text that you photographed, I mean, there's no mention of the vinyasa, is there, at all? I mean, we haven't brought up that point.
There's no mention of it, but there are asanas that are part of the vinyasa series.
Right. So is there a precedent for this, the jumping movement that Krishnamacharya is famed for in these?
Well, I think Jason Birch, he had the theory that many of these asanas that are in the Sritattvanidhi or in the other are parts of a continuation of a moving asana. And it's more clear in the Hatha Abhyasa Paddhati than it is in the Sritattvanidhi, because they've been separated in a different way in the Sritattvanidhi. They're a different sequence.
Right. And before that, I mean, is there any recognizable trace of the Tattvanidhi, the Abhyasa, to something before that? Do you know yet?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I could only speak generally. The Pahalwans or the wrestlers, they do have a series of moves that they do on poles, on ropes, and things like that, all of which are somehow related to yoga. And I just got sent a manuscript from India of 37 pictures of which looks sort of like yoga. But what it really looks like is it's some of the things that street performers do, standing on a pole in the air in Padmasana and things like that. That there's somehow a yoga relation, but not directly. So these things are in the sort of, no, we don't see those anymore in India. They used to be there, but you don't see them any longer. So there is a general connection in some kind of a way, but and people adapt. I mean, this is one of the problems that I talked about in the very beginning of the yoga tradition of the Mysore Palace, is that people think tradition is a static thing, and it's not. Tradition adapts. It looks at things and it accumulates, throws out, forgets, adds in. I mean, for it to become vital again. And in fact, that's what Krishnamacharya and Iyenger did. They revitalized the tradition again. They made it into something meaningful.
Finally, I mean, do you know anything about Ayer? I think you mentioned Eliot's book, and he talks about the bodybuilding kind of gym a couple of doors down from Krishnamacharya's Yogashala. I mean, do you know anything about the influence of Ayer on Krishnamacharya?
Well, there was a book that I got a hold of. It's in Canada, the Vyayama Deepika, which literally means the light on exercise. And I can't remember the exact, but it's got, I think, 21 different categories of exercises. Swimming, the equivalent of barbells, parallel bars. And a lot of these were set up by the English for the royal family, as they wanted to train them and have them under their thumb, in a way. And in fact, there was a I think his name was Bharadwaj. I'm not quite sure, who was hired as a sort of a personal trainer for Nalavadi Krishnaraja Wadiyar, who was the crown prince, because Mumadi, who wrote the Sritattvanidhi, who was done under him, as he became older, he became less manipulable. And that gym was where Krishnamacharya took over, and it had ropes, parallel bars, all sorts of things like that in there, in that gym. That was in the Jagan Mohan Palace originally.
So that was a different room to this this kind of gym of Iyer that was also patronized by the Maharaj.
I think that what the Maharaja did is he wanted to have an exercise system that had some kind of indigenous quality to it. So Krishnamacharya was put on the palace payroll and given that gym area to work with the Arasu boys, who were the sons of the royal family. So that's how that started off. And then afterwards, he ended up in the Pathashala, which was also patronized by the royal family, but open to a whole other group of people.
What do you see the direction of yoga in India, modern India today, is related to this perhaps reluctance to accept that tradition is continuously evolving, right? and looking for more ancient roots in it, to claim it as something particularly indigenous to India? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, there has been a whole movement of both in India and primarily in America, to take yoga back. And that's basically a politicization of yoga as being a Hindu contribution to the world. And so there's been that movement. And of course, with Modi, that has become even more. But this is they're strong.
Okay, Norman, it's been an amazing interview. What are you doing now? Where are you going? What are you studying nowadays? What's on the agenda next?
Well, what am I studying nowadays? I'm trying to read the Katha, which is a 12-volume work, which is very easy Sanskrit, and I'm reading the Shanti Parvan of the Mahabharata in Sanskrit.
Oh my God.
I read the whole Mahabharata when I was in India. It took me 3 years at 5 chapters a day.
In Sanskrit?
And I had Sanskrit and English. Because I didn't want to look up all the words individually at the time, so I had both, so I could look it up quickly.
Oh, that's just incredible. I mean, if someone wants to kind of start in this field of understanding Sanskrit or any other kind of scholarship, do you have any advice for them?
Well, I'm very happy about the way that I studied Sanskrit, that I went there and worked with teachers. That wouldn't be possible today. You could do it, but it'd be very difficult to do in the same way. So I was happy with that, but it hasn't done me, I haven't been able to contribute as much as I would have liked to have done with that knowledge. And it's very difficult fitting into the universities, because a class of an hour or 3 hours a week isn't enough to be able to work with a language. In fact, even languages in general, I feel like it takes 5 years of communication to be able to understand a language. And I was lucky when I went to Mysore. I couldn't speak Kannada, and the pundits who I was learning from couldn't speak English. So all my teaching was in Sanskrit. So that made a big difference. The modern world has problems.
Maybe we'll leave it there. What a great ending. Well, it's been just a historic moment to connect with you, and I'm sure that the audience will really appreciate hearing some of this. What was such a formative point in the yoga study that we're now kind of witnessing by people that we've mentioned, modern yoga scholars. So I want to thank you again for your contribution, Norman, and thanks for coming on and speaking to me. So enjoyable time with that.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you.